March 14th, 2027, 2:31 local time. The Strait of Hormuz, Northern Approach Corridor. Wind out of the northwest at 11 knots. Visibility 4 nautical miles, reduced by dust haze drifting off the Iranian coast. USS Gravely, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer assigned to the Combined Maritime Forces patrol rotation, was holding course 247 degrees at 14 knots, positioned 31 nautical miles northwest of the Musandam Peninsula. Nothing about the night was unusual. The watch rotation had completed its third cycle. The Combat Information Center was running at standard readiness. The SPY-1D radar completing its 22nd thousandth sweep of the patrol, covering a cone of airspace extending 200 nautical miles in every direction. The surface picture was cluttered with ordinary noise. 11 tankers in the northbound lane, 7 southbound, 2 fishing vessels tracked since sunset and logged as non-threatening. The electronic warfare suite was recording sporadic emissions from the Iranian coast. Routine shore-based radar activity unchanged in character or intensity for 3 weeks. The underwater picture was what no one was watching closely enough. 9 days earlier, March 5th, an IRGCN autonomous underwater vehicle had been deployed from a coastal facility near Bandar Lenge. The drone maintained acoustic contact with USS Gravely for 7 days, holding at 38 meters depth, 800 meters off the port beam. Gravely's SQR-19 towed array never detected it. The drone's acoustic signature had been engineered to fall below the detection threshold of U.S. hull-mounted sensors in the frequency bands the SQQ-89 prioritized at patrol speed. At 2:31, the underwater drone uplinked a final targeting package. Gravely's position, course, speed. The offset geometry to the ship's center line from the northwest quadrant, a bearing placing an inbound projectile outside the optimal engagement arc of the ship's forward CIWS mount. The package was transmitted via a VLF relay buoy that surfaced 1.2 kilometers off the coast, broadcast for 11 seconds, then submerged. A signals intelligence satellite logged the transmission. Its daily downlink was scheduled for 6 o'clock. That was 3.5 hours away. The Khalij Fars battery at Site Kilo 7, northeast of Bandar Abbas, had 4 mobile TEL vehicles, each carrying 2 semi-ballistic anti-ship missiles. 300-kilometer range, Mach 2.3 terminal velocity, 3-meter circular error, probable. 3 TELs had been repositioned 6 days earlier to concealed launch points along the coastal highway that had never appeared in NGA imagery. Only Vehicle Alpha remained at the original site, deliberately as a decoy. The IRGCN planners knew the Americans targeted known sites first. At 2:34:11, the battery commander transmitted the execute order. The Spy-1D was completing sweep 22,017 when the first track appeared. Track 4, 891, bearing 338 degrees, range 284 kilometers, altitude climbing through 3,400 meters, velocity 1,100 meters per second and accelerating. Aegis classified it in 0.4 seconds. Ballistic track inbound. Before the classification was complete, Track 4892, Track 4893, Track 4894, 4 semi-ballistic tracks, staggered, converging on a single aim point that the fire control system recognized with cold mathematical certainty as the center of mass of USS Gravely. The tactical action officer had 247 seconds to impact for the first missile. The engagement sequence was automatic. The first SM-6 left aft VLS cell 37 at 02:34:28, 17th second after detection. A second SM-6 followed 4 seconds later. 2 more in rapid succession. 4 interceptors assigned, 1 per threat, 2 ESSM rounds designated as terminal backstop. Both CIWS mounts came to automatic engagement mode. The math was tight. 4 inbound tracks, 4 interceptors committed, the saturation designed to test exactly this equation. Time to first impact, 212 seconds. The first SM-6 achieved intercept at 178 kilometers. Track 4891 disappeared. The second at 162 kilometers. Track 4892 gone. The third was tracking 4893 with nominal geometry when, at 22 kilometers from target, the missile executed a 4.7G lateral maneuver. Pre-programmed. Randomized. Designed to defeat a kinetic interceptor that had committed to a closing vector. The third SM-6 passed through the aim point 0.3 seconds after the missile had moved. Miss. The ESSM backstop, Cell 14, launched at 2:37:04. It tracked. The Khalij Fars was at 14 kilometers, descending at 73 degrees, Mach 2.1. The ESSM achieved intercept at 2:37. 09. Track 4, 893, fragmented on the display. The fourth SM-6 neutralized track 4, 894. 2 seconds later, the screen showed 4 tracks neutralized. The TAO's headset was announcing all tracks clear when the hull shuttered. Track 4893 had not been fully neutralized. The ESSM had impacted the guidance section and warhead initiator, but the motor casing, still carrying 280 kilograms of inert composite material, continued on a degraded ballistic trajectory for 9.4 seconds. It was not a functioning missile. It was a dense metallic projectile, traveling at approximately 380 meters per second. It contacted USS Gravely's port side at frame 119, deck level 2, at 02:37:18. The warhead had not initiated. What it was: 280 kilograms of steel and composite striking a hull at the energy equivalent of a medium caliber round at point-blank range. The hull plating at frame 119 deformed inward. The structural web at deck level 2 failed. The forward fire main, a 6-inch pipe running longitudinally at that level, ruptured at the impact point. The SQQ-89 sonar processing room, occupying the compartment immediately inboard of frame 119, received the full force of the structural failure. SPY-1D array. 2 registered 40% signal degradation as the power bus serving the forward electronics bay fluctuated. 40% reduction in sensitivity, 18% reduction in track capacity. Forward VI-LS. Cells 1 through 32 lost primary power for 11 seconds before the automatic transfer switch rerouted to backup. The IRGCN planners had known the hull breach at that specific frame location would produce exactly this cascade. The fire main rupture dropped forward. DC pressure from 125 pounds per square inch to 34 pounds per square inch in 8 seconds. A secondary electrical fire started in the SQQ-89 processing room from shorted cable runs, and the compartment sprinkler system was fed by the ruptured fire main. It had no water. The ship developed a 3.1 degree list to port. Free surface effect. Accumulated water from the pipe. Detectable from the bridge. Also detectable by the IRGCN drone, still at 38 meters depth, 800 meters to port, recording every acoustic change in Gravely's signature. The TAO was mid-sentence when the deck moved. Not vibration. Displacement. The lateral shift that every sailor learns to distinguish from sea motion, because it involves the whole ship rotating slightly on its longitudinal axis, and then not rotating back. Red lighting on emergency protocol. Alarm tones from the training films, except this time they were real. The smell came through the ventilation system 40 seconds later. Burning insulation, sharp chemical, like a capacitor failure multiplied by 100. 2:37:18. The watch section had been on duty 1 hour and 43 minutes. None of them had encountered this outside a simulator. Damage Control Central received its first report at 2:37:31. Fire in the SQQ-89 processing compartment. Fire main pressure loss forward. Structural compromise at frame 119 deck level 2. Flooding accumulating from the ruptured pipe. 3 reports in 13 seconds. DC repair. 7 personnel was already moving. They reached the access hatch to the affected compartment at 02:37:54. 36 seconds. The hatch was warm, not hot. Fire had not yet reached the bulkhead. The team leader cracked the hatch 14 inches. Visible flame in the aft section. Smoke at overhead level. Water on the deck at approximately 12 centimeters and rising. He called DC Central and received entry authorization at 2:38:02. The portable P250 pump was assembled in the passageway, while the team leader and 2 others entered an SCBA gear with a P100 foam applicator. The fire was centered on a rack of electronics processors shorted by the structural failure. Burning circuit boards. The acrid smell of synthetic insulation. The foam applicator reached the seat of the fire at 2:38:29. The petty officer operating it had never used one on a real fire. The technique was adequate. Flame suppression began at 2:38:41. The flooding was the more immediate problem. The ruptured fire main was still pressurized. The automated isolation valve had not triggered because the pressure sensor downstream of the rupture was reading a false low that the system logged as a gauge malfunction. The team leader identified the error at 2:39:14, tracing the water source to the exposed pipe run on the port bulkhead. He radioed DC Central. The isolation valve was closed manually at 2:39:41. Water influx stopped. Total accumulated. Approximately 2,100 liters. The P250 began evacuating at 2:39:55, 50 liters per minute. The fire was fully suppressed at 2:40:12. The team shored the structural web at the impact point, using timber shores and hydraulic jacks from DC Locker 3. A procedure requiring removal of 3 equipment racks that took until 2:46:00. The damage control team reached frame 119 in 90 seconds. Water to the knees. The portable pump weighed 91 kilograms. The petty officer who carried the base section was 23 years old and had never seen flooding outside a trainer. His hands found the pump connections by feel in the dark. The pump started. The water level stopped rising. At 2:48:33, DC Central reported to the bridge. Flooding contained and reversing. Fire suppressed. Structural integrity maintained. SQQ-89 processing room non-operational. Forward fire main segment isolated and bypassed. Ship's list, 1.4 degrees port, reducing. Forward VLS, online on backup power, full capacity. SPY-1D Array 2, operating at 62% sensitivity. Ship status, degraded but operational. Elapsed time from impact, 11 minutes and 15 seconds. The Khalij Fars battery had fired for a reason. The IRGCN had identified a navigational constraint. Ships transiting the northern Hormuz corridor maintained course and speed through a 17 nautical mile segment where their electronic warfare systems were partially masked by the Musandam terrain. The battery's organic search radars were inadequate at 280 kilometers. Without the drone's acoustic profile, the firing solution would have had a 40-meter CEP. With it, 3 meters. That was the difference between a calculated engagement and a speculative one. The commanding officer's report to 5th Fleet at 0249 covered attack vector, engagement geometry, 1 impact from a degraded projectile, damage status, and probable launch location. Bearing 338 degrees, consistent with Khalij Fars from the Bandar Abbas Lenge sector. He requested medevac for 2 personnel and authorization for a response engagement. Fifth Fleet had not been waiting. The strike package was already assembled. The authorization came back at 2:53:17, 19 minutes after impact. USS The Sullivans, operating 34 nautical miles northeast as the Northern Patrol Element, had been at modified general quarters since the attack tracks appeared on the shared tactical picture at 0236. Its forward VLS was loaded with 12 Tomahawk Block 5 missiles in coastal strike configuration. At 02:54:02, the first Tomahawk left Cell 1. Cell 1 at 2:54:02. Cell 3 at 2:54:14. Cell 5 at 2:54:26. Cell 7 at 2:54:38. 4 missiles in 36 seconds, each assigned a different target, each flying a different routing. All 4 programmed with time-on-target sequencing to arrive within a 90-second window. The launch produced a deep, sequential percussion through the steel of the hull. Not the sharp crack of an interceptor, but something heavier, more deliberate. 26 minutes and 44 seconds since impact. The adversary had planned for the strike. They had not fully planned for this. Money shock. The degraded Khalij Fars fragment that impacted USS Gravely. Remnant cost estimated at $380,000. Damage to ship systems. Estimated $34 million in repairs. 17 to 21 days offline for the SQQ-89 suite. The first 4 Tomahawks. $1.87 million each. $7.48 million total. Running cost at T plus 22 minutes since authorization. $7.48 million expended. $34 million in damage to be repaired. 4 FA-18E. Super Hornets from USS Abraham Lincoln, operating 280 nautical miles southeast in the northern Arabian Sea, had been on the catapult since 2:52. 2 aircraft armed with Slammer missiles, 2 with JDAM packages. The execute order reached the carrier at 02:55:43. The first aircraft was airborne at 02:56:11. All 4 formed up by 02:58:30, heading northwest at 420 knots, low altitude to defeat coastal radar coverage. The B-1B Lancer, operating from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, had been airborne since 1:17 on a maritime patrol profile when the alert came over its data link at 02:35. It was 380 nautical miles from the nearest strike target. Updated mission parameters arrived at 02:54. The aircraft was already on a heading that would bring it into JASSM-ER employment range in 32 minutes. It carried 8 JASSM-ER missiles. 4 were now assigned. Site Kilo 7. The original battery position that had appeared in NGA imagery received the first Tomahawk at 03:32. 44. Vehicle Alpha was still there. The Tomahawk's imaging infrared seeker confirmed the TEL at 14 seconds before impact. The site's maintenance structure, fuel storage, and access infrastructure were rendered inoperable. Vehicle Alpha was no longer operational. The IRGCN had sacrificed it deliberately. They had written it off before the first missile was launched, knowing it would draw the first response round. Cost of the decoy: 1 TEL and one $1.87 million Tomahawk. The exchange was, from the IRGCN's planning perspective, acceptable. The second Tomahawk impacted the coastal radar facility at Bandar Abbas, Maine at 3:35:22. This installation had provided over-the-horizon targeting support for the Khalij Fars engagement, the long-range queuing that supplemented the underwater drone's data. With it gone, the remaining Khalij Fars batteries in the southern sector lost their primary targeting architecture. Their organic search radars reduced effective engagement range against a maneuvering surface target from 300 kilometers to approximately 80. That single change in geometry would define every patrol interaction in this sector for the foreseeable future. Tomahawk 3 impacted the communications relay node at Quesham Island at 033609. This facility relayed encrypted radio communications between the IRGCN Coastal Defense Command at Bandar Abbas and the dispersed TEL elements operating from mobile positions. After its neutralization, vehicles Bravo, Charlie, and Delta lost their encrypted command net. They retained organic radio, but without frequency hopping protocol. Every subsequent transmission was readable. Tomahawk 4 impacted the Khalij Fars ammunition storage facility at Manab, 47 kilometers northeast of Bandar Abbas, at 033751. This facility held reload magazines for 3 of the 4 Kilo 7 TELs. Its neutralization did not affect the TEL's current load. Each vehicle had arrived at its position already armed, but it eliminated the ability to reload after the current rounds were expended. 1 engagement cycle per vehicle, and then the coastal defense capability of this sector was functionally consumed. Money shock running total at T plus 44 minutes. 4 Tomahawks at $1.87 million each, $7.48 million. 2 Slammer at $0.75 million each, $1.5 million. 4 JDAM rounds, $112,000. F/A, 18 mission cost, $340,000. Total U.S. response expenditure, $9.43 million. Total Iranian infrastructure value rendered inoperable, approximately $197 million. The ratio was not coincidental, it was doctrine. The F/A-18 package reached the target area at 033914. The 2 SLAM-ER aircraft engaged the IRGCN Coastal Defense Command facility at Bandar Abbas from 180-kilometer standoff, releasing at 339.14 and 339.31. The missiles received mid-course updates, impacting the facility at 347.22 and 347.38. The 16-second interval was deliberate. The second missile targeted the hardened underground communications section, accessible only after the first warhead compromised the overhead structure. The communications section was rendered inoperable. The 2 JDAM aircraft engaged the coastal patrol base at Bandar Abbas East, the facility that had supported the underwater drone insertion 9 days earlier, with GBU-31 munitions. The maintenance building, fuel pier, and 2 patrol vessels in harbor were rendered inoperable. The base would not be available for maritime drone operations for an estimated 6 to 9 months. The B-1B reached JASSM-ER employment range at 0326. Its 4 targets, the 3 dispersed TEL positions, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, plus 1 additional location flagged by Signals Intelligence as a potential 4th operating point. Vehicle Bravo was at its pre-surveyed position. The JASSM-ER impacted at 034118. TEL inoperable. Vehicle Charlie had relocated. Sometime between 0245 and 0300, after the strike, anticipating a response, the crew had driven 4.3 kilometers north along the coastal highway to a secondary position identified during route reconnaissance, but not formally entered into the battery operating plan. The JASSM-ER targeted the primary coordinates. It found nothing of military value. The missile impacted at 034154 with no secondary effects. Vehicle Charlie was 4.3 kilometers away, intact, armed, and operating without its secure communications net. The 4th JASSM-ER targeted the suspected additional position. Signals Intelligence had detected a brief electronic emission from those coordinates at 241, consistent with a TEL systems check. When the missile arrived at 342.33, the site was vacated. A thermal signature on the seeker's infrared showed a vehicle had been present within the last 90 minutes. It was not there now. Vehicle Delta's location remained unconfirmed throughout the engagement. No transmission, no radar activation, no detection by any U.S. sensor from the time of its original dispersal 6 days earlier. Somewhere on the coastal highway. 2 armed Khalij Fars missiles. No encrypted communications link. A known unknown, logged explicitly in the after-action assessment. 2 misses. 1 decoy absorbed. 1 vehicle confirmed escaped with 2 missiles and no targeting architecture. 1 vehicle location unknown. The response had been fast, precise, and overwhelming. It had not been perfect. The IRGCN planners had anticipated that it would not be. Their doctrine, like US doctrine, accounted for the fog. The first Tomahawk impacted Site Kilo 7 at 03:32:44. That was 55 minutes and 26 seconds after the Khalij Fars fragment struck USS Gravely's hull. 55 minutes from impact to first target rendered inoperable. Within that window, damage control completed, ship stabilized, report transmitted, authorization received, strike assets launched, targets engaged. 55 minutes. The adversary had planned 9 days for a strike that took 9.4 seconds of fragment flight time to reach the ship. The US had taken 55 minutes to neutralize 6 facilities and 2 TEL vehicles, with a combined infrastructure replacement value of over $197 million. At 04:17, USS Gravely transmitted its formal damage assessment, SPY 1D, Array 2 at 62% sensitivity, recovering. SQQ-89, sonar offline, 14 days for field repair. Forward fire main isolated and bypassed. VLS, 96 cells operational. Propulsion, full speed available, both shafts online. 2 personnel medically evacuated, both stable. 3 compartments sealed pending structural survey. Watch standing complement reduced 2.7%. USS Gravely departed under her own power at 4:31 at 18 knots, heading south toward Muscat. She did not require a tow. 3 weeks to return to full operational status. The IRGCN Southern Sector accounting. Site Kilo 7, neutralized. Bandar Abbas radar, inoperable. Keshem relay, inoperable. Manab storage, inoperable. Bandar Abbas command facility, inoperable. Bandar Abbas East Boat Base, inoperable. Vehicle Alpha, inoperable. Vehicle Bravo, inoperable. Vehicle Charlie, intact. 2 missiles, no targeting architecture. Vehicle Delta, location unknown. Of the 4 TELs, 2 were inoperable and 2 had survived by relocating. The survivors had no reload capability, no secure communications, no long-range queuing. Effective range, 80 kilometers. And the US Navy now understood the IRGCN relocation pattern, which secondary positions had been used, and how the acoustic pre-targeting technique had been employed. The IRGCN drone was recovered at 6:44, 9 kilometers off the coast. Its 9-day acoustic profile, including the hull compromise signature, the CIWS engagement, the damage control operations, was assessed as operationally valuable. The drone had not been detected before, during, or after the engagement. That was the entry in the US after-action report that appeared in bold text. The battle damage assessment transmitted at 6 o'clock on March 14, 2027. 1 projectile impact, $34 million in ship damage, 2 personnel incapacitated, SQQ-89 offline 17 days. US response, $9.43 million expended, 6 sites rendered inoperable, $197 million in adversary infrastructure removed, 67% reduction in southern sector radar coverage, encrypted command net disrupted for all surviving launchers, 2 misses, 1 decoy absorbed, 1 TEL location unresolved. The assessment's single analytical conclusion. The 9-day covert acoustic surveillance had provided a 3-meter CEP targeting solution unavailable to any land-based sensor in the battery's organic equipment set. Without it, the Khalij Fars salvo would have been an area engagement, statistically unlikely to connect. With it, the terminal maneuver geometry was pre-calculated against a confirmed track and heading. The underwater drone was not the weapon. It was the factor that made the weapon effective. The gap was documented. The corrective measures were initiated within 72 hours. Modified towed array protocols for straight transits. Increased active sonar intervals during low visibility nighttime passages. Deployment of additional Mako underwater countermeasures to the 5th Fleet asset pool. The doctrine had been updated because a degraded missile fragment had found the precise hull frame that its planners had selected 9 days earlier. And an 11-minute damage control evolution had kept the ship in the water long enough for the response to proceed. USS Gravely returned to the 5th Fleet area of responsibility 22 days later. The 2 TELs that survived, Charlie and Delta, were never located. They withdrew from the coastal road network 6 weeks later when their battery life degraded and reload capability was exhausted. A system with no targeting architecture and no resupply is a potential, not a capability. The IRGCN had demonstrated the capability once. The infrastructure that made it repeatable was gone. The Strait of Hormuz remained open. The patrol rotation continued. The watch section that had been on duty during the engagement completed its tour and rotated home. The underwater drone was refurbished and returned to operational status within 6 weeks. No one had found it. No one had confirmed its existence until IRGCN documentation was obtained by intelligence channels 3 months later. That was the entry flagged in bold. 9 days of undetected covert acoustic surveillance had enabled a 3-meter CEP firing solution against a maneuvering U.S. destroyer. The gap was documented. Corrective measures initiated within 72 hours. Modified towed array protocols for straight transits. Increased active sonar intervals. Additional underwater countermeasures deployed to the 5th Fleet pool. Doctrine updated. The 11-minute damage control evolution had kept the ship in the water long enough for the response to proceed. USS Gravely returned to the 5th Fleet area of responsibility 22 days later. One question remained in the BDA without a resolution. Vehicle Delta's location on the night of March 14th. 2 armed missiles. No confirmed track. No intercept. That is the distance between a tactical engagement and an unresolved problem. 55 minutes of overwhelming response. And one answer that the battle damage assessment could not provide.